Yeah, I think from here on out, we should do the fitness first because
Yeah.
for those in the audience, it does seem for me to take a little bit of time to settle down in front of the camera. And I know Heath was big in the theater and stuff when we were younger and debate, but I'm a little bit stage uh, averse. So it takes me a minute to settle in, and I can talk about fitness all day long. And when we get to the politics, it's always the first time I'm saying it out loud sometimes,
Yeah.
versus versus just kind of ranting in my own head.
My
So
problem is I'm so cynical, I just don't want to do it. So if we sit down and talk about something that's not our current state of stupidity that makes me insane, then okay, well, I'm here. We might as well get into the whatever it is we're going to talk about today. I've
well,
already forgotten because I'm old.
let's do about 2 minutes of neuroscience here that might make you feel better too.
Okay.
So yes, everything political is frustrating, and I am with you on the cynicism to some degree, but when it comes to the science of stress, one of the big factors that plays into what makes a situation stressful and what doesn't is control. Do you have control of the situation? Do you have control of what you're doing in the situation? And what I have found with being able to get on here and or even just have discussions with people out loud is you do kind of almost wrest a little bit of control in a situation where we don't have much because we're one of 330 million people in this country when everything seems to be spiraling out of control. Uh, so at least I have control of my part of it, and I can say it out loud and talk to Heath, and maybe somebody will listen, and we can keep continuing the conversation. So it does actually reduce my stress level about everything to some degree, even though I'm mostly stuttering my way up, getting my points out here.
Well, what what makes it hard for me to accept that is that um so I've mentioned this in the past, and I kind of um, did I mention this when we were talking over the weekend, or have I said this when we were recording that I think the demeanor of the president matters a lot more than what the president does.
I have a updated comment on that. You mentioned that both in our
Okay.
conversations and on here.
So we have, I think I've mentioned this here, that there's a good argument to be made, a very good argument, one that I subscribe to wholeheartedly, that under Woodrow Wilson's second term during World War One, we were a fascist country. I can't remember if it was 3,000 something or 5,000 something political prisoners were put in jail during the war, and some of them it took a while after the war was over to even get out. I don't mean that in the hyperbolic way we sometimes say that now. No, these were actual political prisoners. They were jailed for no other reason than they disagreed and spoke out against the U.S. entry into the war. Well, what happened after that? Well, we got Harding and his return to normalcy. That was literally the title of his campaign. And then after him was Coolidge and Quiet Cal, as he's called, and the Roaring Twenties. So the country kind of reset. It said, "All right, that was dumb. Let's not do that again." Um, and we've done that before. FDR was practically a dictator, and as much as he was beloved personally, one of the first things that happened after he died is, all right, so let's not do that again, and let's pass an amendment that says a president can only serve 2 terms. So we've been in bad places before, and we've always reset as a country when it looked like we were going to
Not to be
spiral out of
confused with the
control.
Great Reset, which is what they're trying to push on
Which is
us in
what they're
some
trying to
ways.
do right now. So
Yeah.
so things were really crappy in the 70s, and then what happened, whether you love him or hate him, the switch in the 80s was, it's morning again in America. Ronald Reagan and his message of hope and patriotism. That's what we got in the 80s. So we've always reset. But what worries me is that as left leaning as the education system has always been, it hasn't been radically progressive, which is what it has become now. So I
You're
feel like
talking
we
the
were,
university system.
well, but it is,
It's more so in the uh,
it is infesting primary and secondary
yes.
education more than people think.
Well, it's infesting them now, but historically, last 30 years or so, this is more recent than the
Yes,
university system.
yes.
Yes.
And you didn't have as big until kind of the 80s and 90s is when that real big push to get everyone to go to college. That if the goal of high school needs to be to get you to go to college, not to teach you so that you can go be an adult and get on with your life, whether that's college or going to work or whatever. So I feel like we were able to reset because you had a lot of people that didn't go to college, and even if they went to college, they had a good core, a good foundation from their parents and from their primary and secondary education, their K through 12 education, that they even if we disagreed on our politics, we still had that unity of spirit about the big picture, the big principles of what America is and what it means, right? I don't know that we have that anymore, and I feel like a a good example of that is frickin' Kaepernick and why I hate him so much, and not just him, but the movement around him is not that long ago. It would have been like an 80-20, 90-10 split, and it's a lot closer to 50-50 than I'm comfortable with. And and not because what he was supposedly protesting was something people vehemently disagreed with, but again, the way he was protesting matters. It's the flag and the anthem are supposed to represent the ideal, the best of us, the unity that whether we vote for different people or go to different churches or don't go to church at all, we can still come together under broader principles. And that's what he was attacking, and that's what a lot of people are clinging onto and saying, yeah, America sucks, which is what you're going to get into.
Yeah, well, you brought up Cap. It's a good example of kind of a slight epiphany. Epiphany for me, it might be common knowledge for other people that doing the same thing we're doing. But the more I learn about postmodern philosophy and the mental, oh, I don't want to say a bad word here, but the internal mind fuck that it is the conclusion I keep coming to is it's something only a wealthy person even has the luxury to ponder. And the problem is we we have people with social safety nets not being a policy, social safety nets being their actual privilege in society, pondering about things that they think that other people that don't have that safety net would benefit from. And it's not true because it's not based in reality. The only reason they have the luxury to entertain these ideas is because they don't, reality doesn't come for them in the end. Because they have that status in life, that position like he had as a professional athlete with millions of dollars and Nike throwing money at him. People in well-off families, the middle-aged women that this actually does target for lots of reasons, because they sit around looking for purpose in a fed an ideology that they have the luxury of not being affected by. But when you use these same principles that come out of this and ultimately manifest into policies, they hurt people that are trying to survive and are forced to survive because they are embedded in reality, where your decisions determine if you eat or have a place to sleep the next day, or or we'll take it even to progress in society. we can go back through all our episodes, and my main theme is that this ideology that we're about to discuss and paint a broad picture with is what is probably, in my view, this is my opinion. I always try to make it clear when it's my opinion. This is my opinion. It is the number one thing holding back the lower income minority group of people. I like to group people based on tangible traits, not their skin color, but it is, we have to, because it's targeting a certain skin color and it's teaching a certain thing. So until I can say, until I can't say that statement that it's targeting a certain skin color, we have to still speak in those terms. And I want to reach a day when we don't. I'm not going to pull one of these, well, I hope it's like the same as the color of your hair, because that's a little bit delusional, I think, at least in the short term. But I want it to be something where we don't attach value to. I think that's a great step. Let's make it something we don't attach value to. But yeah, I think it's the number one factor holding those particular people behind, and the ones that don't suffer from the continued need to survive on a day-to-day, week-to-week basis are imposing something on those that do, because it makes them feel like good people.
There's a good, we've touched on this, and at some point I think we need to do a full episode on global warming, because climate change policy and all that, because I'm not entirely sure where you stand. I'm curious how we'll line up, but there really is a good example there, whether you're a super hardcore environmentalist or you think it's all a bunch of hooey, or somewhere in between. It is absolutely a fact that the wealthier nations can afford to deal with these issues. And there's a good scene in a 2007 documentary. It's British, so you know it's good because the narrator has a good British accent. It's called the Great Global Warming Swindle. And one of the things it talks about is the effect of Western industrialized nation global climate change policy in the third world. Because what we do a lot of times is, when we give aid to, say, a rural health clinic in Africa, we give them a little windmill and some solar panels, and they go to this rural health clinic, and the doctor says, look, I don't have reliable power. Some Western nation came in and they gave me a little solar panel and a little windmill, which gives me enough power to run the lights or run my refrigerator. So if he has an emergency come in and he needs lights to treat a wound, he has to hope he doesn't have any samples that are going to go bad while he's doing that. Because to turn the lights on, he turns the refrigerator off. He can't run both.
I don't want to get too deep into the environment thing, because
it's a whole thing.
We have a tendency to ramble on tangents. But affluence actually is probably one of the biggest beneficial things we can do for the environment, making people wealthier, which is what we were doing for quite some time. I brought up those numbers a little bit ago, why 2000 to 2010 was so good and 2010 to 2020 so bad. But the other thing is, it's a way of approaching problems. So you can take an incremental change approach, or you can take this is what we need to be doing, so let's do it approach.
Yeah.
And I'm a progression guy, and progressive overload is the best way to improve your system in training. Progressive change is the best way to improve the system that is societies, including global society. And I think they skipped a step here. Yes, we need to be getting away from fossilized fuels, but there's an intermediary step between all solar, all wind, or whatever. I mean, obviously something like fusion would come in handy, but from just all fossil fuels. And that intermediary step is something we've been doing to some degree, and affluence had something to do with it. Technology has a lot to do with it, is becoming more efficient.
Yes.
Why did we skip that? Why did we spend, I'm not gonna say we skipped it, we spent so little time when it comes to the reference of all industrial society. Why did we spend so little time in the hybrid phase? You look at the fuel efficiency of hybrid vehicles versus regular vehicles. They did the small SUVs, they did the cars, and they were doing well, and it was creating a big change because you're using half the fossil fuels, if not less. But they never expanded that to trucks, for instance. You have very few hybrid style trucks. Make that, expand that to your big rigs. Because well, now that pipelines are getting taken down, we're going to be dependent on big rigs and trains. But yeah, why are we skipping the step of hybrid? We're not ready to fully convert yet to something that doesn't use fossil fuels. Why not just spend a little time in the space of making our fossil fuel use more efficient? But
Well,
that gets me. Well, this is gonna be a good segue to my doom and gloom.
yes, it is. So, I mean, it is a good segue to what you're going to talk about because it is. I don't like the system, so let's tear it all down. Okay, well,
Mhm.
first of all, that's dumb. Secondly, there's something called the law of unintended consequences.
Yes.
Okay, so for instance, along this same line that you were just talking about, so say GM, I think it was, has said that by 2030 they're going to make their entire fleet all electric. Okay, well, wait a minute. As you said, we skipped a step here. We have skipped that hybrid phase. So you go to all electric, that means you have a coal powered car because most of the electricity in the United States is still generated by coal.
Mhm.
So we haven't moved away from that yet to if you're concerned about the emissions of your car, well, then you're probably making it worse because instead of the emissions of unleaded gasoline, it's the emissions of coal.
Well, and to add to that too, so Heath's right in that the power comes from somewhere, and it's fossil
Yep.
fuels ultimately at this
Yep.
point. No matter how many turbines we have at this point, it's still a small percentage of our total energy generation. The other part is now we've added a waste. These electric cars have batteries,
Mm-hmm.
and batteries don't last forever.
Mm-hmm.
Batteries last like 5 years, 6 years, even if
And
they're
they're
good.
really messy to make in the first place.
They're really messy to make in the first place, and they're not quite on the list of biodegradable items. That's why you have to recycle them separately from your trash and everything, because they are a pollutant if they bust open, and not a very harmful one, not even a lightly harmful one. And so when it comes to, I just slid right back into environmental issues. When it comes to environmental issues, I think humans have the biggest impact with their waste versus the emissions, because plastic, I know you've talked about recycling before, and the cost of creating it doesn't save when it comes to redoing plastic, but there is the physical waste part, and we've only got so much room on this planet. Which again, I slid back into this because it leads into what I'm about to talk about too. We've only got so much room on this planet to house this waste, and it doesn't break down that quickly. So that recycling process, though it's not very efficient from an energy standpoint or a monetary standpoint, it is efficient from a space standpoint because we are using that thing that doesn't go away, or breaking it down into something much smaller. So when we talk physical waste, I think we have a bigger impact. Plastic bags on the beach and stuff like that.
But like everything we've been talking about, we're not allowed to have this rational discussion because if you disagree with the meme, if you disagree with the science rather than science, if you disagree with the science and the narrative, then you hate the planet, you're a Neanderthal, you're a science denier, etc. and so forth. We can't have a rational discussion. And I think that
Well,
leads right into.
Well, it's also the binary too, because
Yep.
if I say I'm a recycler and I'm a non-recycler, then you can bring your point up about energy efficiency and stuff with recycling, and you're completely correct. And I can bring my point up about physical waste and how it for lack of a better word, pollutes the environment and causes damage, and I would be right. And so we've got two rights colliding in a binary argument when you can actually marry those two things. And I can
And what you have to do then is, and when that happens, what you have to do then is weigh the cost benefit analysis, which we don't do. When it's an all or nothing, you never get to that cost benefit analysis.
and with that one is which is the bigger issue right now. And with both of our opinion on the emissions and the energy, probably the physical waste is the bigger issue, because we can make the other one more efficient. We've only got so much space on the planet, which is actually one of the big problems. We're running out of resources, which leads us into the next part. So we've made the point previously that a lot of the things going on could lead to a very bad end for bad reasons in the historical precedent of elites and working class always fighting for this separation versus upward ladder type environment, and the elites always trying to pull away, whereas the working class are always trying to pull them down or work up, one of the two. And very seldomly do you have elites trying to pull people up. So if they're telling you they're pulling you up, it's probably a lie for their own benefit. Or they're willing to pull a few people up so they are pushed up even higher in response. So we talked about last time, if you think of it like a game, someone's always trying to play the game and manipulate the game. And when we talk about resources, which is part of the game, is we have a limited amount of resources on this earth, which is why Elon Musk is trying to get us to other planets. So I think that might be a little too long-term approach for what's going on right now. It's at least trying to do something productive, and he's got the means and intelligence to do so. The problem is he's going to run out of time if we don't change what we're doing right now. So we're looking at resources and class struggle, and we brought up the education deficiencies and how with COVID lockdowns, as well as basically destroying Enlightenment value type education with all this decolonized math and make physics less white and all that. So you're going to have a whole generation of people learning this new science and math, which we've seen through history is always detrimental. So if I'm an elite, and now we're going into Sam's opinion space here, if I'm an elite, I would not only want to get more power, but I would want to make sure my children have access to as many resources as possible. And one of the ways of doing that would be to create less people, because we're overpopulating the planet to some degree. The places we don't inhabit very well are because they're very hard to inhabit. So we're either going to destroy the environment inhabiting them, or we're going to make less people. Let me bring up something I made earlier, just a little graphic for everybody to listen to while I'm talking. And we touched on this last time. Did I get the right one up? See it now?
This is diversity training.
Yes. Okay. So I'm trying to think of the best way to lead into this. Eventually, this stuff's going to get so ridiculous, it's going to have to be forced upon us. And I brought this up because I made this graphic because we talked about it in our last talk. I painted a picture. All these 9 points here are just, they're just facts. They're things that are happening. They're things that are being done, and they're things that are being taught. And then when we talk about people trying to game the system, what you've got to do is create a system that's hard to game. But also you've got to look at what environment would allow someone to game the system. What would make it easy for the bad actors to come in and do bad things? Uh, and right now, I want to specifically talk about the military because there are things changing in how they're trained that we need to look at. And personally, I think we should all be a little worried about.
Mhm.
So diversity trainings in general, and for those who have had to do this on corporate level or in school, are all based on critical theories. And the critical theories are a blend of postmodern philosophy and Marxist ideology. We go into this in more detail in a previous episode. But I know a lot of people immediately shut off with the Marxist ideology, but it is. It truly is, and we're going to go into. I'm going to show you some excerpts from some of their trainings that point that out. But it's attached to identity instead of class, where you had the bourgeois and the proletariat before. Now we have black and white.
Well,
Or
let me go off on a kind of tangent, kind of on point rant here. People tend to turn their brains off if you talk about communism or Marxism, in large part, annoyingly, because the media and academia has, since the beginning of the movement, been sympathetic to Marxism. You can go look. There was the New York Times knowingly covered up the purposeful starving of Ukraine during the 30s in the Soviet Union. They knew what was going on, but because they were sympathetic to communism, they covered it up, and something like 6 million Ukrainians were purposely starved by Uncle Joe Stalin. Okay? That's just one example. So people roll their eyes because of the Red Scare. Well, the Red Scare wasn't wholly irrational. The Soviet Union, the USSR, killed tens of millions of people. Mao's China killed tens of millions of people. The Khmer Rouge was a communist movement in Cambodia that killed millions of people. Communist regimes during the 19th century killed way more people than fascism did. And yet, they're the enemy, and if you call someone a Nazi, that's like, ugh, that's the ultimate evil. And if you call someone a communist, then you're a joke. No, Marxism is dangerous. The ideology is dangerous, one. Two, as we talked about last time, a lot of these people are Marxists in technique, okay? Uh, Lenin and Mao, too, and other Marxist thinkers, they established techniques to create revolution so that people with these ideas, even if they weren't true Marxists or communists, could create power. There was a rash in the 20s and a little bit in the teens. There was a rash of domestic terrorism in the United States that a lot of people don't know about, that were caused by anarchists. And the reason I'm doing this here is because they weren't anarchists. They weren't trying to just destroy the system and create, The Walking Dead or whatever, where it's every man for himself. No, they were actually communists. They were communist anarchists. A literal contradiction in terms.
Antifa.
Exactly. Communist anarchist ideologically is a literal contradiction in terms. It makes absolutely no sense. On the one hand, you have communalism where we all work together, and on the other hand, you have, we all do our own thing and stay out of my way. It literally cannot coexist. But technically, as a technique, they can coexist, because what these anarchists were trying to do is create anarchy, is create chaos, so that a Marxist revolution could take hold.
Well, that, and it's the delusional utopian type mentality that
Yes.
if we were all equal and completely free anarchists, then we would do out of our own goodwill everything it took to be a commune.
Mm-hmm. Well,
So
it's I've made if you don't know the term anarcho-capitalist, then lucky for you. But I know a number of people who are anarcho-capitalists, and I have annoyed them greatly by saying that anarcho-capitalism is the other side of the coin. It's the mirror image of communism. They're
mirror
both
image.
utopian ideologies that are wholly impossible because they completely ignore human nature.
Uh, did you get my new screen?
Yes.
All right, I'm bringing up some textbooks here because this is what was being taught in our universities, as we previously alluded to, and now is being taught in our corporations and newly being presented to our military. Again, impressionable 18 to 25-year-old youths uh, that probably had some sort of background that forced them to join so bitter to the system to some degree because they were forced to join to take a job where they could die for minimum wage basically. And there are patriots in there, but let's be real, most of us uh, that would be enlisted would have done it because it was our option coming out of high school. uh, but again, impressionable age, background, if they've seen any combat, probably some form of PTSD to make things a little bit more complicated there, and then being taught an ideology that uh, basically says that you're here and you had to be here because of society and because of these hierarchies. If you were, Biff, Chad's son, you'd be in law school, living the high life, uh, taking advantage of young women with your frat boys. So I highlighted the section critical approach to social justice refers to the specific theoretical perspectives, and I hate the way they use theory here because scientific theory involves a lot of scrutiny, and they use the word theory to sound like science, but
you can't scrutinize
you
this
can't
or you're a racist
scrutinize.
Nazi.
Yeah, you cannot scrutinize, and there was to use a term Brett Weinstein coined, a lot of idea laundering to make it look like science. uh, but they recognize that society is stratified hierarchies. It's divided and unequal in significant and far-reaching ways along social group lines, including race, class, gender, sexuality, and ability. Critical social justice recognizes inequality is deeply embedded in the fabric of society. And I want to say specifically here, the United States liberal order, which is our society that we live in. So we're teaching kids that this is the nature of the beast, what it is to be the fabric of America. And if you go down here, they talk about the hierarchies and unequal power, as we brought up in the last one. So I'm going to keep going back and forth between my graphic and
And of course, like all great lies, there's a kernel of truth there that allows it to take hold. Well, of course there are inequalities. Show me a place where there isn't an inequality, but that doesn't mean that things are unequal because of something nefarious. The late great, another casualty of the awfulness that was 2020, the late great Walter Williams loved to use the example of the NBA. The NBA is something like 20 or 20%. The NBA is something like 80% black. Is that because
70 something. I just saw
do
the
what?
number yesterday. 72, I think, percent.
Okay, so okay, so it must have changed relatively recently because of the growing influx of European players because of the European professional leagues are getting better and better. Anyway, so 72%. 72%. The point being, the American population is it's under 20, isn't it? The black population in America is like 17, 19%, something like that. I think you've looked at the numbers more recently than I am.
What is it?
But the
Population
black
what?
population in America is something like 17 or 19% of the
Oh
population.
no, 12 to 13.
12 to 13. Okay, I thought it was almost 20. So
Now
12
we
to
don't
13.
have the 2020 census for
Okay,
the final answer, but the numbers being used for estimates are like 12 to 13. Yeah.
right. And what we're constantly told by the postmodernist critical theories is that if you see and unequal status, it's because of systemic oppression. So is the NBA systemically racist? And of course, they'll say no because black people don't have power, but they sure
Mhm.
seem like they have the power in the NBA when they're 72% of the players, and the players increasingly have more and more power, such that if a player wants to demand a trade, well, then he's going to get a trade. If the players decide we're upset by the George Floyd video and we're not going to play a frickin' playoff game, then the playoff games get postponed. Sure seems like they have a lot of power. So does that mean they're systemically oppressing white people?
Well,
No.
no, and that's where postmodernism comes in because nothing has to make sense. Uh,
Yes.
but also look at a lot of the narratives around contract disputes and stuff. How many times are players compared to SLAVES to the owners?
Yeah.
In
Yeah.
fact, I liked him as a player, but he did cause a lot of problems when it came to this area of thought. And I think that might be part of why they wanted to trade him was DeAndre Hopkins said we're treated like this group of people from the 1700s.
Yeah. Go read
Uh,
Uncle Tom's Cabin. Go read some Frederick Douglass and see what an actual one looks like, you idiots.
yeah, they typically don't make millions of dollars, but uh,
Typically, no.
typically no. But brought up from that same textbook because I need to bring my peeps in here. Why, if you're liberal and you're still supporting this movement, here, this is Exhibit A for why they don't like you. Many of these movements initially advocated for a type of liberal humanism, and what they're speaking to here is the original civil rights movement, by the way. So if they say don't bring up Martin Luther King, well, they abandoned him a long time ago because he wasn't good enough for them. And here's why. The logic of individual autonomy and that underlies liberal humanism, the idea that people are free to make independent and rational decisions that determine their own fate. That sounds kind of nice. Was viewed as a mechanism for keeping the marginalized in their place by obscuring larger structural systems of inequality. So being a humanist, being a liberal order humanist that believes in individuality and that, we're all created equal, is the problem because it disguises what's happening under the surface. The thing you can't see. So the thing you can see, and you can actually empirically study, is hiding the thing that you can't see that we just want you to believe.
And it's really infuriating to me, as somebody who knows history and likes history and has read a lot of history. This is that sleight of hand that critical theory does, and maybe you can explain it better than I can, of how they change the definition of system. Okay, Martin Luther King and that first wave of civil rights movement in the 50s and 60s, they were absolutely attacking systems. They completely recognized systems.
Mm-hmm.
What they were marching against, what they were standing against were specific laws that subjected people based on the color of their skin to unequal treatment. They were specifically marching against the fact that they were required to sit in the back of the bus. That's what the bus boycott was all about. They said, "Hey, we're not going to put up with this anymore." That's what the lunch counter sitting was all about. Was that there were laws that mandated they couldn't do this, and they said, "We're not going to put up with this anymore." So they were absolutely marching against and recognizing the injustice of systemic racism. But what critical theory has done is they have done this sleight of hand where they use the word systems and systemic, but they change that definition.
Well, they changed it to the invisible hierarchy that
Mm-hmm.
exists between races. No matter what you think, I mean, this is where we're going to go in the next point because we're going to get to the expanding definition of white supremacists. But I didn't highlight this next sentence, but I kind of wish I did. In other words, it fooled people into believing that they had more freedom and choice than societal structures actually allow. And there's a lot of impact to that statement because again, we're dealing with a group of people that are doing a job where you can die for very, very little money. You don't do that by choice. And so now they're being told that they're there because of a system that took their freedom away, whether they know it or not. They're not responsible as a people for where they ended up. And you brought up the Band of Brothers last time when we were just kind of rambling on about this. But now, okay, you want to say you cannot apply this to white people, but you can. Well, especially in this textbook because they go into class later. But you can, because your brother that is to your side, that is a person of color, you've become more family to them than to your own family in a lot of ways. You fought alongside this person, and now you're being taught that he's only there and possibly going to die for this country that didn't want him to be anywhere but there. And so that has a lot of impact whether you're black, Hispanic, white, Asian, whatever, because now your family, this person that you are willing to die for, you're being led in a thought direction that they're only there because society made sure they couldn't be anywhere else. So even if you're under the impression that, oh, it was my own choice because I had privilege as a white person to be in the military, I just squandered it, which is what they want you to believe. Now your family, they didn't have that choice. And so we're going down this road of creating a divisive ideology in someone's head. But I guess I just interjected a little opinion there. I'm just laying out the facts. Hold on. We'll keep doing that. Anything you want to add while I'm bringing up the next?
Well, no, it's not just opinion that when you inject contradictory divisiveness into someone's head, you can drive them crazy. That's what the Atlanta shooter was all about. Maybe we'll get in trouble here, but I don't care. You, I don't even want to get into to a religious debate here, but the fact is that he had two conflicting ideologies in his head of um, wanting sex all the time and thinking that it was out there to be had and that everyone was having way more sex than him, but also being told from an evangelical strict Christian point of view that that was wrong and bad. So he's got these two things fighting in his head. He obviously had other issues, and it drove him crazy and drove him to an extreme. That's hardly an isolated example. So you start putting conflicting thoughts into people's head and pounding it in there over and over and reinforcing it, you're going to drive people crazy.
Well, and to speak to to people on my end of the aisle, when we talk about the concept of free will, even if you hold to the camp that we aren't 100% a product of our brain chemistry and the environment and the history in our history of adaptation to environment, then even if you're not 100% on there, you still have to agree that all of those things are extremely powerful in our decision making. And again, I brought up impressionable age with these military guys. Again, 18 to 25 being probably the most predominant age group there, which 25-year-old is the average age for the prefrontal cortex to finally be fully developed,
Yeah.
which is the part of your brain that communicates back and forth between the reactionary part of your brain and how you're going to respond to things. Let me give a quick biological example of how powerful the reactionary part of your brain is. If you have a stroke that takes out the part of your brain that makes a picture of what your eye sees. So your eye just collects data, and then it goes back through your optic nerve to your brain and creates a picture, and that's what you see. And that goes through your the thought centers that take that picture and creates information, memories, and your thinking reaction to that picture. But if you have a stroke that cuts that part of your brain off, and you see a snake, but you can't see a snake, so you're completely blind. You can't see a snake, but a snake is there, and your eye catches it. You still react to that snake because there's another pathway that goes straight to the reactionary center of your brain for good reason, because we have to react faster than we can think. And so you can see something without making a picture in your brain. And when it comes to reacting to our environment, that happens a lot faster than the part of our brain that makes the picture. Now, add that to any thought, there's an interplay of an adaptation between those two centers of the brain, and now we're creating if you do it right at the right age, you can create a zombified people that do exactly what you want.
And that's not hyperbole. I mean, how many historical examples do you want me to give you? Because I could probably give you a half a dozen without really even trying. Obviously, I've mentioned the Hitler Youth guy, the old man that I talked to quite a bit in Germany. That, I mean, that's the most obvious example, but it's hardly the only example.
Which gets us to the next part. You brought up dismantling and tearing everything down. Oh, they tell you to do that.
Oh.
But each of us does have a choice about whether we are going to work to interrupt and dismantle these systems or support them. Key words here. You're either working to dismantle them or you support them.
So Frederick Douglass was a racist.
Exactly. Their existence by ignoring them. So ignoring them, just trying to get on with your day, you are supporting the bad system. This is very important for this discussion here. There is no neutral ground. To choose not to act against injustice is to choose to allow it. And this is language we've been seeing a lot in the news. Silence is violence.
Mm-hmm.
Not doing something is as bad as doing something. You can't not be racist, because if you're not racist, then you're supporting racism. You might as well be doing the act. So this is part of that concept creep that we're talking about when it gets to harm. So I'm going to bring back up my. Right, so we've just gone down through number 4 there. It's the responsibility of good people to dismantle these systems. And going down through 1 through 4, we've shown you in their own textbooks, in their own teaching material, where they express these thoughts. And that was just a few examples from a couple sources. There's plenty more, a lot more radical than that too. But I wanted to, when I bring data to my side of the table, I actually usually bring the least supporting of my supporting data, because if the least the least supporting supports my position, that's why I hate when people keep fudging the numbers to make their point. Because if you have the numbers in your favor, it's enough. It doesn't have to be impactful emotionally.
Yeah. Well,
now,
it should be enough.
Now, again, we're looking at this hierarchy thing, and they're attaching it to race. So specifically to race, especially the black-white dynamic. Anyone who supports the hierarchy, which we just told you how, is to just want to live in America and think America's okay, is a white supremacist. You are supporting the dynamic that quote unquote holds black people down. And it doesn't even matter if you're white. You can be white adjacent, multicultural white supremacist.
Multicultural white supremacist. Yeah, I love that term. I was looking for that speech I referenced last time. It's an 1852 July 4th speech by Frederick Douglass, and I was annoyed because I could only find abridged versions of it. So I encourage anyone to go look for it, and if you can find an unabridged version, give it a link. I've got a book of letters and speeches by Douglass somewhere around here, and I can't find it. But I mean, he is a multicultural white supremacist by these people, because he was saying in that speech, I defy you to give me a single clause in the Constitution that supports slavery. He said,
which is where the sleight of hand comes in, because now they're just saying the Constitution itself, just by existence, is designed for whites.
And his whole point was, I love this nation. I love its founding, its founders, and its founding documents because they were so radical and contrary to the whole of human history that had become before. But we people, we flawed people, have done something terrible to it. So that is why he is standing against those, even those who were his friends and supported abolition, saying, no, no, we are not going to dismantle the system. The system is good. We just need to be better.
Well, a quote from Hotep Jesus today. The guy is a freaking genius. Little off his rocker in a couple things, but he's a freaking genius. But I might get this backwards, so flip it if I get it wrong. But he said, "The Constitution cannot protect you, but you can protect the Constitution."
Amen, brother.
Yeah, that resonated with me pretty good. Every once in a while, Twitter throws something good at you. But,
And again, that's one of the ways where I have to criticize the right from the right, that I think they went wrong, is they too often have held up the Constitution like they're holding up a crucifix against Dracula. It doesn't work that way.
no,
You
no,
have to explain the point of it, because it's those principles, and it's people adhering to those principles that give the Constitution value and strength.
well, it's just like all good values. It's not the value itself that protects you, it's the willingness to sacrifice to
Uh-huh.
maintain those values. So we'll get back to that, I think. But I wanted to introduce another variable, COVID. So again, I'm not drawing a conclusion for anybody. You know my opinion from the opening here,
Yeah.
but I'm just laying things out here. You can't. Everything I've put up is falsifiable. Right? Diversity trainings, which is what they're calling them, are based on critical theories. That's a fact. You know, they critical theories blend postmodernism and Marxist ideology. I've shown you that's a fact. According to the modern critical theorist, U.S. social hierarchy is based on identities, and it perpetuates the white male cis heteronormative patriarchy, which is the oppressor. Fact, just showed you that. It's the responsibility of good people to dismantle these, because if you're not dismantling it, you're supporting it, so you're not one of the good people. And on race, this is where the hierarchy is supporting it puts you in a white supremacist, because people who want to support it are white supremacist category. So we're adding another variable, COVID. It's created a us and them in this current climate, because you're either a masker or an anti-masker. You're a vaccinator or an anti-vaxxer. So this creates a very easy visual, because they go along the same lines. So if you're an anti-masker, you're probably a Republican, you're probably a conservative. Now, us classical liberals, we try to take the nuanced approach to it, but we get put in the anti-mask category because we want to have a discussion about it.
Yeah.
I brought up the compass that one time. If you weren't in the top left corner, you're alt-right. So just put yourself wherever you are on that. And if these passport rumors go through, then we'll have a visual representation of if you're a vaccine or a non-vaccine person. But because they go along these ideological lines, the reasonable people that kind of are pushed away from the left right now are also in that category of people that want to keep the liberal order, which we see with number 5, where that puts you. And what I'm going to try not to say it out loud because I don't want to be clipped here, but what category that puts you in. So now it easily allows identification of who the other is, because if someone's walking in the store without a mask, you can say anti-masker, which is also, fill in the quote there. If someone doesn't have their vaccine passport and refuses to get the vaccine, you can also, and like we talked about in last ramblings, it also creates another disdain for that person, another judgment of that person because
Yep.
they don't care about society because they're
And
anti-vax. And or
what infuriates me is you have no idea who that person is. You don't know them from Adam. You have no clue why they're doing what they're doing. Heck, for all you know, they forgot it in the car and they decided, screw it. I'm just going to be in and out real quick. I'm not going to go back and get the dumb thing.
so
That could be it. But you have decided that they're a terrible person in your own mind, and in large part because it makes you feel better about yourself.
and there's a lot of those things to feel because nobody wants to be a racist either. So if you can put yourself in the category of, well, I'm the anti-racist, you
Yeah.
can quote unquote feel better about yourself and hate the other person because they're a bad person.
And if it
They
just so
kill
happens
puppies.
that that
Yeah.
makes it easier for your preferred political policies to get pushed through, all the better, because you're on the side of the angels.
And so now we're having the coupling of white supremacists with domestic terrorism. And I'm going to bring some support for that. But now we've got a triple effect here. Anti-mask, oh, obviously equals white supremacists, which obviously then equals domestic terrorists. And we know they're domestic terrorists because they don't want to wear a mask and they want to kill grandma anyways. So they'll probably kill somebody they don't like, right? So let me bring up some support material for that.
And while you're
Aha.
doing that, just what infuriates me is, as we've said before, is the lack of discussion, the lack of nuance. So there is data out there that I guess we can't talk about that indicates that, interestingly, uh, older people who are the ones who need the vaccine the most anyway are also the ones who have the fewest reported side effects to it, which is interesting. For some reason that they're not sure of yet, younger people, like teenagers, have a higher instances of severe reactions and side effects. Well, they're also the group that are statistically basically zero for COVID mortality. They don't need the vaccine. So, as a parent, maybe I weigh the pros and the cons like you're supposed to do and say, you know what, for me, since my child is very healthy and I'm not worried about them contracting or being a COVID fatality, I don't want to risk getting the vaccine because the COVID is essentially zero for them and the vaccine is potentially complicated. So I'm just not going to worry about it for them. Maybe that's my reasoning, but you have already put me in a camp because you've got this false dichotomy going on.
Okay, again, I'm just bringing things to the table to formulate a picture. I'm going to let you make your own picture. So HR 5602,
Oh, the actual bill in its own words.
the actual bill in its own words, and I highlighted if that comes through,
Yeah.
to authorize dedicated domestic terrorism offices within the Homeland Security. Again, coupling. Recent reports have demonstrated that white supremacists and other far right-wing extremists are the most significant domestic terrorism threat facing the United States. And
And
they
they
go on,
cite an op-ed in the New York Times.
which, when we talk about idea laundering, the New York Times is being sued right now by Project Veritas for slander on their video on erection. I'm trying to think of another word for harvesting, but whatever other word for harvesting you can put in there by a certain person in a certain state that was important. And it turned out the video was actually completely legit. And New York Times, excuse me, put a story out making Project Veritas a right-wing conspiracy theorist group and cited all the other stories from other newspapers that mentioned them as a right-leaning group.
Mhm.
And that was the evidence in their thing. And that's actually in
Yeah.
their defense from the slander suit. There was no evidence. It was just they cited another news source who cited another news source who cited
Yep.
another news
It's
source. And
it's
so
just
it must be true. Everybody's saying it, but they're all
it's
working
a
together.
circle jerk of evidence, and nobody actually tells you why this is the case.
Quick sidebar on Ibrahim X. Kendi. In his How to Be an Anti-Racist, the book, I'm not going to give a percentage to it, but a very high number of the sources in his book are op-eds from newspapers during the time when he said this happened and it's a fact, and then he posts an editorial, or he sourced an editorial on it, which was very hard to follow up on because, I mean, these are newspaper articles from 20 years ago. But we just go down the list: mass shooting, white supremacist; mass shooting, our faces are covering that, Jewish center; far right-wing patriots; mass shooting, white supremacist. Boom, boom. First of all, we're going to 2012, and we've got less than a page.
Hold on, did I see Parkland in there?
How far ago did you?
Planned Parenthood.
The Las Vegas guy was right.
I thought the Las Vegas guy, that just disappeared and got memory hold, which was confusing to me because that was a bizarre one where the guy just seemed like a crackpot weirdo. Okay, no, I think the Overland Park, Kansas.
Oh no, this is a different Las Vegas.
As you were scrolling by, I thought that was Parkland, and that was about to piss me off because that one was horrific by someone who was just an evil, insane person.
The only one that's legitimately by the evidence is the Charlottesville one on here, which I think the whole country agrees that was pretty shitty, including Trump himself if you watch the whole interview. But where's the one I'm looking for? 2020, juvenile armed with semi-automatic rifle headed to the online call posted by self-proclaimed militia group on Facebook to confront protesters in Kenosha, Wisconsin.
Wow.
I wonder who that is, who they're not naming here. First of all, this is still in litigation.
He should sue the Democratic Party.
I wonder if he can.
I should be able to.
I need to get on Locals and ask Robert Barnes. But even look with the follow-up here. After the shooting, local police officers waved the alleged murderer through their lines, even after the bystanders identified him as the shooter.
He identified himself. You watched the video. He went to the cops himself with his arms raised, and they said, "Go on through."
Because he was being attacked by a mob, and that's all they saw. But first of all, that's still in litigation. Second of all, they're saying it's because of a self-proclaimed militia group when he went there with his parents. This is our evidence. This one page from 2012 to now of examples, which some of them are suspect at best on their conclusion on whether it's white supremacist movement at all. And even if they're all correct, it's still not a lot since 2020. If only we had other groups of people that have committed more terrorist acts since 2012. But it's the greatest.
Shockingly, we do, and they're not white or white supremacists. And of course, it also leaves out the single greatest cause of mass shootings in the United States, which is gang violence, which we're not allowed to talk about.
But again, we're going down speculation route too a little bit, so we're interjecting a little.
Not the gang
here.
Violence one. That's verifiable by FBI crime statistics.
Well, we could just take total murder numbers and compare it to those as well and see what's a greater threat. We could take suicide.
Yeah.
I went down my suicide rabbit hole again with the 97% increase in depression rates, and the most recent numbers, 2019, we had 47,000 suicides related to depression. Well, so if you double the number of depression, what number do we add to the suicide rate? We want to talk about great threats to this country. Again, no conclusions, just laying out facts here. Okay, let's get back. Number 8, the people with guns that are responsible for defending the country from terrorists is now being given diversity trainings based on these critical theories. So the theories describe, paint this picture, tell you who's responsible. Uh, those that label of who's responsible is being coupled with domestic terrorism. Domestic terrorism is being labeled the #1 threat to U.S. society, and the people responsible for fighting terrorists are being taught who the terrorists are, whether we can help it or not. And all at the same time, they're trying to use the same ideology and justifications to disarm the American people and take away the Second Amendment. It's all about the environment. People are going to game the system. What environment does this create, and who is going to game it? That's my full stop right there.
Well, and then I'll add my speculation to that, which is this is legitimately terrifying to me, and it should be to everyone. As I've said, the military part is especially worrisome to me because I have long held that we're not going to become Venezuela. The worst case scenario can't happen in the United States because the military won't go along with it. And if needs be, even though they won't want to, they'll act to stop it. Well, not if you are expunging people from the military who hold those ideals and principles to heart and are instead bringing in people who agree wholeheartedly with your critical theory postmodernism quackery and are going to impose it on everyone down the line. And then on your last point there is you start trying to take people's guns away, you're going to get a lot of people that say no. And then what are you going to do? You're going to have to force it. And then
this gets back to our other point or that I brought up about making the problem that proves your point, because there's been a lot of poking the bear with all of these. I think cancel culture is part of this because it's basically getting everybody in a hyper pissed off mood.
Yes.
You cancel Dr. Seuss. Well, how many people have a freaking attachment to Dr. Seuss? And the more ridiculous, the better. It's like you cancel it for that. What the heck? Then you do something like "Baby, it's cold outside." These sound like minor things, but it's just yet one more poke. It's one more poke at emotions. What do you mean that's rape culture? What the heck are you talking about? He's just trying to be charming, So all these little pokes, poke after poke after poke after poke. Well, and now you lost your job because you said the wrong thing at work, but you own a couple guns. And this attack on the First Amendment is the poking of the bear for when they take the Second Amendment. Because the response is typically, I hate the word always, the response is typically relevant to the attack. So you're attacking freedom of speech, a lot of speech comes up in response, a lot of complaining, a lot of bitching and moaning. You attack, you take people's guns, people start shooting. And I hate where this seems to be going, because if I had to be a betting person, I would look at the environment and how that's going to affect the end result. And to me, what we're doing is creating an environment for an explosion. And not only an explosion, but an explosion that's backed on one side by the U.S. military, which is kind of how these things happen.
Yeah.
And I have a feeling this is not something that's going to happen tomorrow or even a year from now. Hopefully not 2 years from now, because we'll probably have a swing in who has some say in what goes on. But when it does happen, it usually clicks pretty quickly. Forgot where I was going in my
Well,
timeline.
my closing thoughts on this are two things. You've heard a lot of people over the last years, or even I'd say decade, talk about how talk about the growing divide and the growing schism in America, and they've made comparisons to the civil rights era, or even all the way back to the lead up to the Civil War. I think there's a better analogy, and that's World War I. especially in Europe, not as much in the United States, but especially in Europe. If you look at the buildup to World War One, you have an incredibly arrogant and elitist elite who are pushing their countries towards this inevitable conflict for their own gain, and some of it for their own gain, and some of them because they thought that is what was best for their country. They were true patriots. But that leads into my second point, which is, well, first let me finish the thought here on this first point is, you've had this building for a while. You're talking about that poking, the constant poking of the elephant. That's been going on for years. I mentioned Michael Moore calling the 2016 election, and he did it by saying, look, you've got all these people in the Rust Belt who you've been pissing on for years and ignoring. So you ignored them forever, and now you're insulting them and how they think and the way they live, and you're taking away everything they have. They have one thing left, and that's their vote, and they're going to extend a giant middle finger and vote for Trump to say screw you. And that's what they did. And that's these same people who were already ticked off, and now you've just escalated it. Okay? So that's one. And two, and this is something you especially have touched on. At some point, you have to say that intentions no longer matter. Here's an example. Rachel Carson is one of the most evil people that ever lived, even though she was an incredibly well-meaning person. So that's a name most people probably don't know. She wrote a book called
This is news to me.
Yeah, she wrote a book called Silent Spring. She did this because she was convinced that modern chemicals had given her cancer. She testified before Congress. She was something of a celebrity. It was primarily because of Rachel Carson's book, Silent Spring, and the doom and gloom around it that led to the United States banning DDT. DDT is a highly potent insecticide. The reason a lot of people don't realize, we used to have malaria in the United States. It was something the Civil War soldiers, in fact, had to deal with a lot when they went into the South, was malaria. Louisiana, all through the Gulf states there, and South Carolina where it's swampier. Well, we got rid of it by trucks filled with DDT solution would just drive down swampy wetland areas and down roads and just spray this stuff, and they killed off all the malaria carrying mosquitoes to the extent that we no longer have to worry about it here. Well, after Rachel Carson's book, it was banned. But not only that, not only was it banned here, we won't give it to anyone else. There are
It kills
nations.
bed bugs, by the way. I could have used that about 15 years ago.
Yes, it could have. Now that's annoying and can cause serious health problems. But here's the thing that infuriates me. We have stockpiles of this stuff still, but we won't give it away. There are countries in equatorial Africa that spend over half their budgets, half their nation's budget, just dealing with malaria and treating the victims and trying to keep it from spreading. We could just give them our stockpiles of DDT and say, go nuts. Worse than the budget, there are these nations in equatorial Africa where 1/4 of all children do not reach the age of 12 because of malaria. Forget all other, third world problems. Just because of a malaria, 1/4 of all children die before the age of 12. An estimated 50 to 100 million people have died because of malaria since DDT was banned. I don't care how well-meaning you are. At some point, the consequences outweigh what you were trying to do, which is why I've always said that Rachel Carson, this well-meaning lady from the United States, is worse than Joseph Stalin.
Well, there's one simple problematic thing about your little rant there. You're a white American male, and you could actually gain status by hating on Rachel Carson So those people in Africa mean nothing to you. You're just trying to use them to gain status by
I'm
taking down
perpetuating the
Rachel.
patriarchy,
Yeah, so it's just the only solution based on what I've read,
clearly.
clearly. Uh, uh, oh, one thing I think would be a good thing to look for when I talk about the long term. This isn't going to happen overnight, and one of the reasons it's not going to happen overnight is because there are going to be people in the military that are resistant to this ideology, and so to me that what one pattern I would say we could probably look for to see if we're heading down this path is how many dishonorable discharges we have coming up, or if we have some kind of vetting in the enlisted military, which we kind of had a mini version of that right after January 6th with the National Guard that was supposed to be protecting the Capitol. They were vetting them because, oh, are you a conservative, or are you did you vote Biden or Trump? Which, to even be able to ask somebody who they voted for, that's unconstitutional. It's supposed to be a blind vote for good reason. So it's this extending of privileges by those in power. Oh, this is where postmodernists get it right, is power determines so much. And the fact that they could even ask these soldiers who they voted for and expect an answer other than I don't have to tell you is enough for me. But now we're bypassing HIPAA laws when it comes to COVID, which I have problems with HIPAA laws, but that ain't it. I just wish doctors can communicate with each other. It would prevent doctor shopping, that's for sure. But I think that would be something good to look for long term, is how many dishonorable discharges are we getting? How many people are just not re-enlisting compared to years before and stuff, and kind of little indicators like that would be one of the, I think, telltale signs.
Well, hopefully we'll be able to get some people on to talk about this further in the future.
Yes, we do want to bring, we at least have one former military fellow that's going to be on. We're going to do that sometime this week. We have to coordinate the time. He said he's good this week. As far as current military, that might be a problem because
that could
we don't
touchy.
know what they can talk about with with the chain of command and stuff involved. So that there's a wish list there, but I'm going to give you almost no chance that that's probably going to happen. But it would be nice to have those perspectives, but we understand.
Yeah.
Yeah.
All right. In the meantime, go talk to your neighbors.
Yes. Talk about puppies or something. Puppies are nice.
Yep. Puppies, or how terrible the Texans are going to do this year.
What, with Cosby as our quarterback, I don't know.
We'll see how long that lasts. All right. Later, man.
Later.